Why don't you accept the word from not only White House officials, but from the former acting commissioner who said these were foolish mistakes about targeting conservative groups, but there is not evidence of a political agenda?
Actually, there is a culture of intimidation throughout the administration. The IRS is just the most recent example. The head of the union at the IRS gives 99% of her campaign money to Democrats. She openly criticizes the Republican House for trying to reduce government spending and has specifically targeted Tea Party groups in her public comments. It's no wonder that the agents in the IRS sort of get the message. The president demonizes his opponents.
That was Mitch McConnell, Republican leader in the Senate there. And I want to take you back to something he said earlier in that clip, saying the president has created a culture of intimidation. Meanwhile, Republicans love to say that Obama hasn't been hands-off or hands-on enough. Who can forget McConnell's tweet after the president's comedic turn at the Correspondents' Dinner, inviting the president for a drink? To me, this struck me as McConnell trying to have this both ways. This guy's doing nothing to lead us, but there's a culture of intimidation. Am I the only one who feels like he's trying to play it both ways? Go ahead and tell me he's not.
He's not. He's certainly not. I mean, look, I'm surprised we're not talking about Benghazi and the fact that the White House involvement in Benghazi and essentially, in my opinion, a cover-up of what happened. And more importantly, out of the Benghazi situation is, where's the justice?
Okay, but we're not talking about Benghazi. We'll get back.
But the AP story.
Mitch McConnell, can the president be leading a campaign of intimidation while at the same time having his hands too far away from the levers of power?
Absolutely. If you're criticizing the Obama administration, whether you're the AP, let's just throw out the First Amendment, the right to press. Let's throw that out. If you're a Tea Party member, certainly if you're criticizing the administration, it's a heavy hand. There's no doubt about that. That seems like what's happening here.
And I do think that Republicans run the risk of walking into a problem here. I do think they have to make up their mind what the criticism of the Obama administration and President Obama specifically is going to be. Is it that he's ineffective, which I think when you look at all three of these scandals you can make that case, or is that he's somehow evil and he somehow had a guiding hand in this whole thing, or is it this third option that he's created this kind of culture of intimidation? I do think that Republicans have a problem if they start to overreach here, and I think that's a real danger for them, and I think you see some of that reflected. I didn't have too much of a problem with what McConnell said, but you see some of that starting to be reflected. And not to mention the fact that when your opponent is having a bad week, you should step aside and let him have it. So they don't want to overreach in that way, too.
But they invited him on Meet the Press. He had to go. Is he both ineffective and intimidating?
I'm shocked that there's gambling going on here. You know, it's like partisan politics in Washington. He won re-election. We're queuing things up for 2016, and Republicans are criticizing Democrats, and Democrats are being defensive and responding to Republican attacks. Oh, it's Monday, right? I think this is neither here nor there, but I agree. You know, they were having a bad week. You should get out of the way and let them have it. But they can't do that in our sort of 24-hour blog, Twitter-driven, media cycle where if they're not saying it, someone else is, and you try and control the message. Did they walk into it with the AP and with the IRS? Absolutely. I think Benghazi was a classic example of overreaching. There was nothing there. But I think this is what goes on.
All right. I want to, instead of being the 75th show to go over the details of what's happening on each of these three stories, I wanted to get to a behind the story if I could. And this is dealing with the Associated Press scandal. The Justice Department under fire for seizing AP journalists' phone records without notifying them beforehand. The Justice Department disclosed the seizure in a letter that the AP received on May 10th. The letter didn't state a reason, but prosecutors said they were looking into an investigation about leaks after a foiled terror plot in Yemen and how the AP learned that the CIA had foiled that plot before it was made public last year. There was another event related to this today. According to the Washington Post, Justice also spied on Fox News reporter James Rosen, a former co-worker of mine, back in 2010, collecting his telephone records, tracking his movements in and out of the State Department, and seizing 2 days of Rosen's personal, not his professional, emails. An FBI agent even claimed that there was evidence that Rosen had broken the law in reporting on classified information. But the way that the Justice Department did this was to subpoena Google because it was his Gmail account. Right. This is something that we first dealt with in the Bush administration and first dealt with in terror cases. And it seemed like the whole debate went away with pretty much a whimper. Is anybody else uncomfortable with the idea of a federal agency being able to investigate reporters or terror suspects or anybody else for that matter just by going to their service providers, getting their telephone records or their web records or their GPS records so they can track where you've been and what you've done?
I'm involved with a case similar to this right now in Brooklyn. The line between work emails and professional emails and Gmail accounts and Yahoo accounts and Hotmail accounts with everybody on smartphones and Blackberries now, the line is blurred so much that an email gets forwarded from your work account to your Gmail account, and it's all sort of become one morass.
I appreciate that.
Targets and investigations are not told they're under investigation, and they're not told that a subpoena has been issued for documents or bank records. Just because it's your personal account doesn't mean that those rules change. I don't know what the uproar is about. The Justice Department didn't alert reporters they were being investigated for leaks on.
Well,
when Tom Clancy wrote books with too many details about weapons and airplanes and naval ships, he was investigated because someone had to be leaking the information.
At least in these cases, they got a subpoena for it. If you go back to the Bush administration, there were about, I think, 2,600 cases where they got information without even going through the subpoena process. But I know it's asked and answered, but I'm uncomfortable with it because if they're searching your house for evidence, there's a search warrant. You get presented with a search warrant. Oh, here's what they're looking for. You don't even get left in the loop on this.
Well, I will tell you, I am uncomfortable with it. And even though I think that the Obama administration, if I was advising them, should make the point that it wasn't illegal. There was a policy disagreement here, but what happened wasn't illegal. I am personally uncomfortable with it, though, because the press is a key member and a key institution in our society. If the press isn't able to have some kind of shield to do these investigations, and I understand the importance of national security and protecting that, that becomes a very uncomfortable position. So I am uncomfortable with it, but I think the Obama administration has faltered a little bit in not defending what has happened here, and I think that's happened in both the IRS scandal and this, and in terms of the AP. You know, listen, they're not making the case that needs to be made. These weren't illegal. These are policy. I think they messed up by not supporting the SHIELD law earlier. Schumer had it out there. It should have been supported. So you see this happening, and they aren't defending themselves. But I am uncomfortable with it, and I think it's a real problem when reporters aren't able to give us information as long as that information.
And the technology used to be you would tap a number. Now you tap the person and the person's various electronic forms of communication, because the technology now is no one's calling your home number. A lot of people don't have home numbers anymore.
Is anybody else on the panel as uncomfortable with this as Jeannie and I am?
Well, I am too. I think this is. I mean, I just read today in the paper that that a lot of people who would normally come forward aren't coming forward. He's basically stifled the process of having people come and talk about what's happening.
Can't protect the source.
You can't protect the source. I mean, we've actually seen journalists go to jail for that recently. But I think it's a problem. I'm questioning, am I living in America or is this China or Russia?
But see, but that's where I have a problem with this. I'm very uncomfortable with it as well. But are we going to sit here and act like we really believe that this is the first time something like this is happening?
Not even
that
remotely.
other presidential administrations haven't done exactly the same thing to reporters?
This is actually
come on.
This is the standard
Any
policy
decent
now.
reporter,
This is the
as
standard
I've said
policy
before, knows there's a strong possibility that you're either being tapped, wired, followed. Under certain mayors of New York, we had a suspicion that certain reporters were being followed. When David Dinkins was first elected mayor of New York City, his campaign manager was immediately audited by the IRS. You explain that, Bill Lynch.
I agree with you 100%. I want to get you guys thinking about this too, because with the questions we have about reporters, particularly when it comes to freedom of the press, what if instead of investigating a leak or investigating reporters, it's a terror case? Maybe not a ticking time bomb somewhere, but it's a terror investigation. Are you more comfortable with the idea of circumventing and going through, getting the internet service provider or getting the phone records? And while you're thinking about that, are you less comfortable if it's, let's say, a divorce case? Would you be, a couple's splitting up and filing for divorce? Would you be okay subpoenaing the person you're breaking up with's internet records, phone records, credit card records, GPS records?
It already happens. First and foremost, if it's a terrorist incident, we already have the Patriot Act. You can go get the subpoena. You can go get the wiretap. That's already done. We live in that society right now. In terms of divorce records, it's already done. If you look at Kwame Kilpatrick up in, former mayor of Detroit. he got, the reason why he was in trouble was because his text messages were
Yeah, but it was a
subpoenaed.
city pager. That was a city-owned. That was
City pager,
So
personal
don't misunderstand.
pager,
I'm
doesn't
deeply
matter.
uncomfortable with all of this, but you're assuming that emails are treated the same as as papers in somebody's house in a locked drawer on a desk, when they're really treated the same as telephone calls and telephone records. So issuing a subpoena to Gmail to the government is the same as issuing a subpoena to AT&T. It's just a different form of communication, but to them, that's the equivalent. Of course, uncomfortable, but that battle was lost with the Patriot Act years ago.
We've had a lot of heavy topics so far. How about something a little bit lighter? Vito Lopez, anyone? Anyone? What's happening in the State Assembly? We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Vito Lopez has officially resigned from the Assembly, but he's not throwing in the towel. He's running for another office. Should he be allowed to have a political second act? And what, if anything, can you do to stop him? We're back after a quick break. Stay with us.